My name is Scott Davis. I'm the founder and executive director of Medium Photo. We are a San Diego-based and Tijuana-based nonprofit organization whose year-round programs are a primary resource for fine art photography in the binational region. The area we call home are the unceded lands of the Kumeyaay people, who continue to occupy the San Diego and Tijuana region and contribute their rich culture, stories, and art. I want to acknowledge and thank the Kumeyaay people for sharing your home with us today. Each year, Medium Photo hosts an event called the Medium Review. This is a portfolio review where contemporary artists meet with curators, gallerists, and publishers of fine art photography. Participating reviewers are asked to nominate artists they meet with for the Second Sight Award. And Amanda Marchand is the recipient of that award in 2022. So today's program will explore Amanda's relationship to photography, environmental activism, and design. Through conversation with Kevin Miller and questions from you, our audience, we will learn how Amanda produces photographic works without using a camera, and encourage our audience to adopt or play with this practice to expand your own creative work and your relationship with photography. So with that, I'll let our guest speakers introduce themselves. We'll start with Amanda.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you so much for having me here today, and great to be here with you too, Kevin. I'm excited about our conversation. And thank you everyone for joining, bypassing a little bit of Zoom fatigue, and hopefully the technical is behind us. So I am, as Scott said, a photographer, and I use a bit of an experimental approach to photography when I'm working with the medium. Often asking the question, what is a photograph? And project to project, this can mean different things. My work can look very different because it's driven by a series of questions rather than the desire for a final look or image or style. So it can be figurative, it can be abstract, and it's also very connected to the natural world, to the environment and our changing planet, and our beautiful spinning troubled planet that we have right now is forefront on my mind. And I've been using a process called lumen printing. We will talk about that a lot more, I'm sure, but that's a little summary of what I'm up to when I'm working.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks, Scott, for the introduction and for Medium for the program. My name is Kevin Miller. I'm a San Diego-based photography consultant and curator with a background in museums for nearly 20 years. This is a great opportunity to look at two things that I really love to see connected in the work of an artist, and that is an awareness of where photography has come from, and in some ways where it's heading, or at least some parts of it are heading, and the embodiment of that contradiction, conflict, and confluence in the mind and hands and heart and imagination of an artist. So it's a wonderful opportunity, and I hope folks can plug into our discussions, and we'll try to make it as accessible to as many of you as we can. Sometimes we get into a bit of specialized dialogue, and we'll try to pause on that and explain. Thank you. So I'm going to sort of start the conversation. So hi, Amanda, good to see you again.
Great to see you, Kevin.
Folks, we did some interviews last year, or was it early this year? I don't know, it's all blended together a little bit. But and I had the chance to get to know both Amanda and her work and the themes of her work. And I'd like to touch on some of that with a couple of discussion points as we go in conversation. One of the questions I had posed to Amanda some time ago was the following. Many of your recent works have been directed away from the camera as the means to capture reality or a fact or an idea, or even further away from the use of a lens that gives us an optical focus view of things rather like our eyes do. The new processes, such as Amanda's direct print or lumen print uses a form of engagement photographically directly with phenomena, rather than through the means of a lens or through traditional image making as most of us understand it. This process, this technical direct engagement with phenomena like time, physical, space, materials, allow a more actual transformation of these phenomena in her hands in order to direct our attention to a different set of what I call a completely different set of palettes than what we've mostly been accustomed to in photography. And just wondered if you could respond to some of those ideas, Amanda.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm going to, I will respond happily to all of those things.
Yeah.
I'm just going to hold up because we talked a little bit about doing a demo, and I thought it would be good to begin with. This is right here. I have some black and white photo paper, and that is the process I'm using. And I'm not, as you can see here, I don't have a camera. I just have the paper, and I've taken some flowers from upstate New York, and I've put them here in a contact frame that actually has a little crack in it. So that is a part of the demo. Do not crack your this has only happened to me twice. But
well, I think it adds. I think it adds something.
It would. This is a really long exposure of September the 8th. So it's put in the sun. So it's been exposing for a long time. It might actually make some dynamic lines in the image. But this is what I'm showing you as the demo. At the end of our talk, I will open up this contact frame and take the piece of paper out and show you how it's reacted to the light, because that is really what I've been doing for 5 years, is taking pieces of black and white photo paper, putting them in the sunlight, and having them respond to, in my case, it's a book that I'm putting on top, but historically, when these had been, were in the 1800s, people would put botanicals, flowers on them generally. That was what was there. Any ephemera, lace, those kinds of things. And so this is part of the demo. And I will also, is this a good time to actually make the other one? Here, I've got very quickly a homemade one. The other one is a few $100s. This is a piece of cardboard, foam core piece of glass. It has no UV in it. That's important because this is a sun-based exposure. I have a box of photographic paper. This is just, you can buy it today. It's not expired or anything like many of them. Ilford here. I know this paper, so it's going to give us some blue tones because each paper has its own color palette. And I've sort of fallen in love with this hidden language. If you're in a dark room, the paper will go black and white when you put it in chemistry, but when you put it in the sunlight, it will go different colors. So I'm just going to slide this in here. And at the end of our talk, we'll see how far it gets with the available ambient light. I'm just going to show you how I clip it onto. So I have to do it a little bit on the desk.
As you do that, let me, as a sidebar, point out that you don't use any chemicals to make the paper change, and you don't use a darkroom or an enlarger. Now that's stating the sort of common sense and obvious. What you're doing is a little bit like a fossil. You're taking a direct impression created by sunlight of an object and then having a reproduction of that outline or shadow. You're fiddling with it there. So yeah, it's like a dinosaur's foot in the mud that gets, that we find 3 million years later, but you do it some hours later. And there's no camera, there's nothing digital, there's not even really a darkroom unless you choose to process the paper later. When someone does this, what they've got then is something that they could scan or copy photograph, or they could photographically process it, right, and get different results that way. Exactly.
So, I intended to use the leaf, but I traveled today, and so I've got a mask, a COVID mask that I just opened up, and it's going to block the light, and where the light hits around it, it will change color. So I'll put that to the side, and we'll look at it in half an hour. We'll see what it's done. But Kevin's correct. You can fix them, and the colors change radically. So in a way, the actual tracing of the image remains, but the image becomes very different. So you can take a picture with your iPhone, or you can scan them if you love the color. And there are different ways of handling these images that are called lumens. But I fell in love with the color process in the paper. So I'm actually fixing mine with a scanner. So that's a little, nutshell.
So the audience and the viewers here today may recollect that, digital really overtook the world of photography about 22 years ago, commercially and professionally. And then for most of us on our daily photography or even commercial, about 15 years ago, we started, so that in the last 12 or 15 years, almost all photographs that most of us make or have made in our name, so to speak, have been digital. And so when photographers come along now, we come along and we look at photography with the full arc from the beginnings in the 19th century to now, where it's so ubiquitous in our culture and where we're sort of drowning in an ocean of images. And photographers are often driven by a different kind of inquiry and appetite for both a unique experience and a unique product. And this, I think, relates generally and specifically to you. Could you talk a little bit about how you got there?
Yes, I can. I think when I started working with photography seriously, I was trying to make images that registered differently from my peers in a way. And people would always ask the where, when question. Where is that? When was that? Mm-hmm. And it was nothing that interested me. It was much more psychological, or had to do with, something inside or deeper that photography wasn't so good at doing. And so I was always up against that. And at the same time, I was thinking that photography is a tricky thing. It purports to have a truth when you take a photograph, but the truth is not really always the truth, as we know from social media or advertising. And so I felt very kind of much at wrestling with the tenets of photography and how it worked. And it led me down this experimental path where I'm now no longer using the way photography indexes the actual world, but I'm indexing it, as you said, through phenomena and light and time and registering on the paper. But it did begin with thinking about what I thought of as the slippery surface of the photograph. And I began cutting into prints and doing collage and sewing into them. I did projections on baths of milk. I played with digital negatives. There have been a whole series of experimentation with the media that began with that original questioning and sort of frustration with it wasn't serving my purposes, because the where, when was not what I wanted to answer.
When I started in photography, I came to it from music and performance, and so therefore a non-traditional both art and photography background. It seems that has had an important impact on you as well, that you took your points of departure and your points of inspiration, I beg your pardon, from rather more intangible sense of sentiments and more intangible sense of what might define the subject. You were influenced by your readings in literature. In fact, you started out heavily in writing, well before just sort of like most people, pick up the camera, take a picture, bit like the image, and then sort of refine and hone that down. You have gone for the intangible sentiments that are not so readily depicted by photography, but in that quest, you start to be able to evoke those in a way that's very useful for us as a viewer to get insights into what really is driving your efforts and what you're trying to get at, and some insights we might gain from that. Is that a fair representation of your origins in photography?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we both share that in common. When you come from a different discipline, it gives you a different access to something that people may approach more traditionally. And so my roots in literature just gave me a different starting point in what seemed interesting to me. Like, I mean, this out of the blue thinking of, the question of grace, or things that are very ineffable. How do you describe something that is intangible? These, but very meaningful at the same time. How do you make an image not didactic? And photography can be didactic and open, but often traditional photography has a certain, with its indexing of the real world, a certain didacticism that wasn't interesting to me. But so I would say that my roots in literature really informed me and continue to inform my practice. A lot of the work I make includes text in a different way, or involves readings around a subject that plays out subtly in the body of work itself. And even this lumen work was actually driven by the idea that most photographs start with an optical trigger where you take a picture. But what happens if you flip that and you begin with language? So I started using all these books that were part of my canon, my photographic canon, or books on nature that were important to me, and using the title as a generator for meaning almost. And so I began with a title and made an image second. So the word came first. So that's another example of how language continues to be really important part of my practice, and something that I'm trying to parse as I work through the visual.
Both in our culture generally, if I may summarize, and individually, we have perhaps become tired of images as we typically see them, we typically consume them. I might go further and wonder whether we are skeptical about what the optical reality we experience, whether that seems or feels adequate, or is the whole story, or isn't. And therefore we want to go to what lies behind, beneath, beyond the visual, to something else. Like if one spends, and I know you have spent long meditative periods, both alone with oneself and alone with nature and alone with natural processes, one gets to a different plane of both experience and then trying to convey that. That's not just, this is the trees, this is the leaves, or this is the view, or gee, look at this sunset. There's all of these other things that are beyond seeing, but maybe a part of knowing. Is that important to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. It actually really is important, and it's informed a lot of the work I've done up until now. When I was just starting out, I did a series called 415-514 of landscapes with a camera, but it was generated by the fascination with the horizon line, that optically we see it, and optically with a camera you capture it, but you can never touch it physically. And that just seemed really intriguing to me. Mm-hmm. And even recently in this current collaboration I'm doing, a project on Emily Dickinson, which I'm not going to get into, but was talking to a scientist, and he was describing how color is color emanating off of something. And so we have to just trust that the object is actually there. The colors are not physically there. They're really just these waves, which is sort of, it's fascinating to me that we're seeing something, but there's this level of trust in it. And I think, I mean, that speaks to even this lumen process, where there's a hidden world, a hidden language, a hidden palette and alphabet of colors in all of these photo papers, the historic ones that are expired, the new ones today. Each one has its own sort of, I think of as a color alphabet, but it's hidden, and just bringing that up to examine is fascinating to me.
It does go right back to the very core origins of photography, where some Frenchman or some Englishman sets a camera up, so-called, or a device that can capture an image, and leaves it like that for 6 hours, or in the case of the first quote unquote photograph, you know, is like 8 to 10 hours of a view out a window. And there's something rather elemental, inspiring, and imaginatively captivating about photographers such as yourself who try to switch gears from the fast, quick, summative telling detail in an instant to really, really slow down. You might call it the slow photography movement if we're looking for a tag. But it gives you access, like slow anything in our modern world. That slowing down gives you access to different parts of yourself, different parts of the sensorium around you, and the larger reality you might be questing to understand. Is that sort of work for you?
Yeah, I mean, that brings up so many things. I don't even know where to start, but as I've been working in this way very slowly, I mean, it has its roots in this residency I did in Finland, where I just sat in the snow for 4 hours with a camera, counting time and listening to my breath. And then inside, once I got cold, doing the same thing through a window, and really thinking, like, the question then was sort of, is it rhetorical, but is it possible to photograph nothing? In parallel with interest I have with meditation and sort of clearing the mind. And then that's in tandem with a lot of, I'd say, Scandinavian writing, where there's like an expanding of time in literature. Karl Ove was somebody I was reading at the time, and I noticed that he cleans his mother's house after she dies. I think it's about 80 pages of just cleaning the house. It's fascinating to me. So there was something in the air that you know, crossing over. But also one person who's been formative for me, she's a psychologist in DC, but she's also a meditation teacher. And she says, if you slow down and walk twice as slowly, you see twice as much. And I think that's so true. In our fast-paced world today with technology and racing around and everybody's on 100 cylinders at once, you know, we've lost touch with the slowness. And for me, it opens up a connection to the world that I don't have otherwise. And photography has been a way to access that. But now with my practice, extending, for me, it's not just an art practice, it's almost a way of life, of wanting to bring together the things that are so important to me, aspirational in living, and have that be reflected in the work I'm making, so that there's not so much a separation, but they're supporting each other.
So the photo historian and curator in me is always looking for, you know, citing someone's practice within the tide of practice these days or historically. And I'm just wondering what you think of the concept that with the maturation and the permeation of digital to completely saturate our world, is it almost inevitable that a lot of us want to jump off in all sorts of fields of life, jump off that merry-go-round and slow down and look closely? Is it inevitable that this is a growing trend in many fields of human activity, but especially in photography? Because I certainly see that as an expansion of the serious practices of photographers, who are looking to go beyond the obvious.
It's hard to answer for everyone.
Sure.
What I will say is that among my peers, my friends, those that are working in the field, I have noticed that originally a lot of us went into it with this love for that other world that's in the darkroom, the world of chemistry and magic and you know, things that can happen that are very much the plastic arts. And then the digital gets away from that. You're on your computer, it's pixels, it's
just
you know,
another screen. Yeah,
it's a screen. And I've seen so many people return, even those that are still working digitally, return to alternative processes, we call them alternative processes, but they're just all the tools of this amazing medium. Photography is so open, and right off the bat, I just loved engaging with photography in all these multifold ways rather than just simply it being a camera that takes a picture. Just thinking of the different elements and aspects, and what is a photograph? I mean, a photograph can be a sculpture, it can be a book, it just has so many permutations. And I see a lot of photographers now challenging the medium and opening the envelope, pushing the envelope in different ways. And I think that maybe is an answer to the question you have. It's definitely the digital medium it's not going away, but there's more than just that. And it's really a rich field that's growing and changing all the time.
Amanda, I want to jump in real quick here. We can see a few tiny thumbnails of your work behind you, but I would like to bring on the video that shows the object quality of your work in situ in the gallery, and the creation of it, just to sort of wrap people into the visuals of what you do.
Great, let's do that.
It seems like we have a little technical lag just there, so perhaps we can converse a bit while that happens, Amanda.
Yeah.
But it brings up the timely point of all these ideas that we've been discussing and you've been presenting for us here. What final form, how do we end up seeing that? In what form does that take? How do you choose to make this work presentable to folks in a gallery or in any other form? Could you talk a little bit about how you resolve and finish the work, present them, and then how we experience them?
You mean how one does or how I do personally?
Well, I think we, the third party, Amanda's got a show on it here. We walk in the door, what are we going to see?
I feel like that's a question a little bit that links up to design, because I'll make work, I'm in the field, I never know what's coming. There's a big sense of unknowing and experimentation. But then there's a second half for me, which is producing work. And that often takes the form of a book. And in fact, for me, the work is generated or given permission by the book itself. And I'll get an idea for a book, and then the work follows. As well as installation capacities of a project. And they can be a book can be its own thing, but then the work can be reinterpreted on the walls of a gallery or a space where, for me, it's almost like the book all over again. The 3D element of it is something to tangle with. And I just learned so many things. In every form that I present work is a design question for me. Design, presentation, and how does the work mean differently in different ways.
So if I walk into an exhibit room with your work well displayed, I'm not going to walk in and see a parallel set of pictures like a bathtub ring around the gallery walls, all at the same size and all in the same frame. I'm not going to see that. I'm going to see something very expanded and with a lot of spatial activity, as well as whatever else you're bringing into the equation.
Yeah, it does depend, but generally
I don't see that you're in a hurry to resolve those. It seems like you like the open experimental questioning of all of your processes, and you're not rushing to sort of finish and tie off a neat bow at the end of something and go, ta-da. Is that,
yeah,
temperamentally, it doesn't seem to be you, but everything you've said seems to indicate an open-ended process that you're very comfortable with.
Yes, it is always, the process itself is also always changing, and questions that I'm asking, they don't necessarily get answered, but they open up new questions, and which will then send me in a little bit of a different direction. I'm working now with a friend, collaborating on a project with a friend from the San Francisco Art Institute when we were graduate students, Leah Sobsey, and we're using plant-based we're taking plant juices and making photographs with the plant juices. And this came out of the lumens very directly. So I'm using different media to think about what a photograph is, and it in a very different way. It sort of will resemble this work, but things constantly shift, and I never know what's going to be next. So I'm not trying to tie things up with a bow. I'm very much just enjoying the questions, the large questions of the universe.
Well, that's one of the most appealing things, is that you're not, some photographers seem to run around with a clipboard and a list and a stopwatch and, oh, I got 30 of those, good, show's done, ready to roll. This is a very organic, open-ended process that seems to bring all of you and all of the things that have sort of defined and inspired you at every level into this open-ended process where you can let it all play. And I find that wonderfully inspiring.
Thank you. It is a lot of fun. I'm looking at the time and I'm not sure, but perhaps is it time to do the reveal here? Do you think, Kevin, or?
Yes, I don't have the time in front of me, but yes, let's do it.
Because I know we started a little bit late, but I think we're supposed to have some question and answers. So here, I'm going to hold this up here. And it's going to be a little bit delicate because it did crack. So what I'm going to do is narrate right now. I'm taking the back off of my contact frame. So that's what it is. And what a contact frame allows you to open up half, fixing the other part down so you can check and see if your image has gotten enough density, if it's gotten enough light, and if not, you can put it back in.
It's like peeking through the window in the oven door to see if the cake is risen.
Exactly. It's another baking metaphor.
It's baking. Yes.
Baking,
exactly.
it's all baking. Yes.
Slow food and slow photography.
Yes, exactly. Oh boy. Well, so what I was noticing is that this one here has kind of bonded with the sun and mold. There's been mold, so it's sticking a little bit. Going quickly. So here, they're still attached. They kind of fused a little bit, but if I pull them off delicately, can people see that okay?
Yeah, I can see. Good.
Okay, good. And just like, there's some of the moisture that has made this incredibly beautiful little.
So the moisture from the plant material fused with this sort of gelatinous surface on the paper, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if you do wet these, they will, it affects the color and the tone. This is a warm tone Ilford paper, so it does go this brown. Look at that, it's really smushy. Anyway, I'm not going to take too long, but you can see the imprint here. And this is something you can easily do at home with any brand of photo paper. Maybe some friends of yours have old expired paper. It will work. It goes a little bit more slowly, but it works just as well. And then you can take a picture with your iPhone or scan it, or you can use a saturated salt bath to fix it, or use some fixative, which you dilute a little bit. There are ways to fix it as well, though the final color will change.
So on YouTube University, there'll be all sorts of clips about that, won't there?
You can read about it all. You have to dig a little bit with lumens, but it's there. Yeah. And then I'm going to open this one up. Now, this wasn't in the sun and it wasn't there for very long. So unfortunately, it's not that magical, but I'm just taking my clips off. But I can see that it has changed. And here we go. Here we go, and you've got a mask shape. So this you would want to probably, you would want, if you had lace or a flower, there would be, the density would affect, you'd see some tonality in the middle, but you can see here, that was just like half an hour. and we're getting definitely the outline of the image of the mask. And it's a very different color, this silvery blue, from this.
So when my children were very little, we had little blueprint kits, and we'd go outside on the sidewalk and little 4x5 inch pieces of paper. So people can even do that and sort of re-enchant their sense of discovery, become a little kid in some ways. Again, it's an innocent pleasure.
It is a real pleasure, and I'm lucky to do it all the time. And still, after 5 years, I'm doing the same thing, just putting a book down on a corner of a piece of paper, making one mark per piece of paper, and it hasn't changed too much. Yeah. And then I also did have my book here, which is this little book, The World is Astonishing with You in it. We didn't talk too much about this part of the project, but it's just a little piece of lumen paper that is exposed by the structure of the book itself. And then a book with these abstract birds, ferns, and wildflowers. This is a beak shape, for example. And I think there's a flower shape. They're very brute. They're very basic, a fern shape, a flower shape. And this book opens up into, made with a book here. Let's see here. This piece is called Field. And so it's just this little book with the titles, and that's one of the way that, as you were asking, how does everything come together? Books really solidify all the questioning and play. They give me a place to make sense of it all and bring things together.
One of the projects you had told me about earlier was some years ago, at a certain sort of socio-cultural political moment, you gathered a group of people together to make a big mural print. Could you tell us a little bit about that and why you did that and what effect that sort of performable sense of things gave you?
Yeah, that was actually my very first lumen, and it was at a time when I had never really heard of lumen printing, and it was a new administration in the White House, as we'll remember. So it was a very a different time of much turbulence and division in the US. And I just wanted to figure out, as an artist, a way to bring people together, and was asking, what is the role of an artist in today's world, as many of my friends were. And so I engaged with the public at the San Francisco Art Institute, and through my Traywick Contemporary, my gallery in California was having a 20th anniversary, and invited people to sit on photo paper. So make a lumen print with their bodies. It was 11 by 11 feet. And we sat for half an hour in silence. And I just wanted to bring people together without divisions or labels, or just have people sit and celebrate being alive and everything that we share in common, rather than look at all the differences. And that was the first of, I think I've done 5 now, of these large collaborative pieces. And that was the beginning into this world of lumens that I've been doing for 5 years. So it had this political urgency, and I think we're about to run out of time, but that was the beginning of all the lumen work that spurred everything on.
Just a couple of last minute comments from me. You've got a very gentle, patient sense of the world, and a gentle and patient touch. You're not trying, it seems to me, adding my critical voice, you're not really trying to overpower the world with your vision, but rather listen quietly and allow us and help us to see and experience through your sensibility and your eyes these longer term processes that you find both comforting and stimulating and meaningful. And I certainly want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Kevin. That's so kind. Appreciate it.
So that may be the end of our conversation. Are there any questions that have come in on text or chat, Scott, that we haven't covered in our conversations that we should address now in these last couple of minutes?
We do not have any yet. I think you guys have done a really wonderful job to explore that. And if there are questions from anybody in the audience, we welcome those. You can go ahead and place them in the chat.
And then, of course, there's anything that you want us to engage briefly for now, Scott. Anything else?
No, I don't have any additional engagements. Amanda, can you remind us of when you started with the Lumen prints? And
5.5 years ago, it was
Okay.
Trump's inauguration.
Got
Right
it.
after that, I did the first Lumen circle.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that
Yeah.
we were on point with that.
Yeah, I would like to just also say for whoever in San Diego and elsewhere who doesn't know of Medium Photo, what a fantastic organization it is, and how great it is for beginning photographers, emerging, mid-career, anyone who is a photographer, is a photo lover. It's just a wonderful support, and so many creative voices that are brought together through it. Medium Photo. Scott runs such a fantastic program. It's very dynamic, and it's just growing all the time. So if you don't know about it, please check it out. It's just phenomenal.
Well, thank you. That's Amanda, where we were able to meet, the beginning of a great friendship. And it is absolutely as I mentioned in the beginning of the talk, it's an important resource that's recognized worldwide for fine art photography in the binational US-Mexico region.
Mm-hmm.
We're happy to be that resource.
Thank you. For all you do.
Amanda, thanks for the chance to be in association with you and in conversation with you, and to tackle some of these questions, which are always of interest to me. And I want to thank you for your commitment to your art. The art has you as much as you have it, of course, as most of the people in our audience know. Thank you.
And it's always a pleasure to talk with you, and it was a real treat to get to meet you in person at Medium last spring.
Yeah.
Yes, looking forward to continuing.
Scott,
well, thanks. Yeah, thanks to everybody who joined us today. It was really an incredible experience to listen to both you and to be part of San Diego Design Week. I'm so appreciative for everybody's input, and both to Kevin and Amanda for leading a dynamic and inspiring conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, everyone.
Kevin. Thank you.
Great. With that, we will see you soon.
Sayonara.